June 12, 2026. The largest stock sale in Wall Street history happens on the Nasdaq. Bigger than Saudi Aramco. Bigger than any tech company that's ever listed. Hundreds of thousands of people buy in on day one. They get almost no say in how the company is run. Buried in the paperwork, a second class of stock, held almost entirely by one man, worth 10 votes for every one of theirs. Do the math. The founder walks away with more votes than every other shareholder in the building combined. His name is Elon Musk, and that's not even the unsettling part. Years before he ever took this company public, it had already become something no government on Earth, not even the one that writes its checks, could switch off. This is SpaceX. Built on paper to give humanity a way out, it quietly became the one thing humanity can't survive losing. The man who got spat on 2001. Elon Musk has just sold PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion. He is 30 years old, rich enough to never think about money again. He has one idea. Send something to Mars. Not colonize it. Just send something there. A small greenhouse. Prove humans can do it. Get people excited about space again. He doesn't want to build a rocket. That's insane. He'll just buy one. The Soviet space program had collapsed with the USSR and left behind warehouses full of decommissioned rockets. Musk figured this was, as they say, a market opportunity. He sat down across from a Russian rocket engineer, offered $8 million for a rocket, explained the greenhouse, made his pitch. The engineer listened. Then he spat on Musk's shoes. Did he just spit on us? I believe so. Was that a no? I believe that was a no. On the flight home, Musk ran the numbers. Cost of materials, manufacturing. He had read every aerospace textbook he could find in the months before the trip. The conclusion? Rockets cost about 3% of what companies were charging for them. He didn't need to buy a rocket. He could build one cheaper. In 2002, Musk founded SpaceX out of a warehouse in El Segundo, California. $100 million of his own money. Engineers willing to work insane hours for below-market salaries on the premise that they were going to change history. Boeing, Lockheed, the old NASA contractors looked at this warehouse and saw a rich person's hobby. The rocket they were building was called the Falcon 1, and between 2006 and 2008, it failed. 3 times, 3 launches, 3 fireballs in the Pacific. SpaceX had enough money for exactly 1 more launch. If the 4th Falcon 1 didn't reach orbit, the company was finished, weeks from shutting down. September 28, 2008. Kwajalein Atoll, Marshall Islands. The 4th rocket ignites. It worked. I love you guys. The first privately built liquid-fueled rocket to reach orbit ever. 6 weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. The aerospace industry had just admitted a warehouse startup into the room. They would regret being so polite about it because the math had already shown him the next problem. If launches stayed cheap, demand would follow. And if demand followed, every single launch would still be throwing a stage worth tens of millions into the Pacific. The question wrote itself. What if the rocket came back? The economics of rocket reuse simply don't work at scale. SpaceX did not attend that conference. For 60 years, every rocket ever launched had been exactly that, launched. The first stage detached, fell into the ocean, and was never seen again. Tens of millions of dollars, every single flight. Nobody questioned it because nobody had solved it. SpaceX spent years trying. The early attempts looked like something out of a blooper reel. A rocket returning to a drone ship. Getting close, then tipping over and exploding. Getting close, then exploding. Getting close then, actually. That one also exploded. December 21st, 2015. A Falcon 9 booster relit its engines, flipped around, descended back through the atmosphere, and touched down vertically, softly, exactly where it was supposed to, at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Musk said afterward, "I still can't quite believe it. No one has ever brought an orbital-class booster back intact." The engineers who'd said it was impossible watched it happen on a live stream. Now the math changed permanently. A traditional launch, $60 to $200 million, one time. Then the rocket is scrap metal in the Pacific. A Falcon 9 reflight, 15 to 20 million, using the same booster again and again, sometimes over 20 flights. A 70 to 80% cost reduction per launch in an industry that had never once lowered its prices. United Launch Alliance, which had held the U.S. government launch monopoly for years, charged the Air Force around $400 million per launch. SpaceX undercut them by a factor of 10. By 2025, SpaceX was conducting 171 launches in a single year. The entire rest of Western aerospace managed 19, combined. The warehouse hobby project had eaten the industry. But rockets, it turned out, weren't the point. They were just the truck. The sky belongs to someone now. Getting to Mars was never just an engineering problem. It was a money problem. SpaceX needed revenue that no government could cut off. Permanent, recurring, global. Musk's answer was to look up. 2019, SpaceX starts launching Starlink. Not one satellite, not 10 to 60 at a time, stacked like cards in a deck, deploying into low Earth orbit in a chain that lit up astronomy photographs and briefly terrified everyone who watched the sky. Most of Earth has terrible or non-existent internet. Starlink would fix that from space. No cables, no cell towers, no infrastructure on the ground at all, just a dish pointed at the sky. In 2025, Starlink generated $11.4 billion in revenue, 61% of SpaceX's total. Turns out the truck was the whole game. If a competitor wanted to build a network like this, they had to pay to throw a rocket into the Pacific every single week. SpaceX only had to pay for the fuel. The satellite company was now the rocket company's reason to exist. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. 2 days into the war, the Ukrainian government contacts Musk. Their infrastructure is being hit. Military communications are breaking down. Soldiers can't coordinate. Musk activates Starlink in Ukraine and ships terminals. Within months, over 150,000 Ukrainians were using Starlink daily. Drone pilots, artillery units, battlefield commanders, all running their operations through a private American company's satellite network. What was supposed to be a consumer internet service had quietly become the communications backbone of a war. No treaty, no formal authorization. One man decided Ukraine got internet. But then, in the fall of 2022, during a Ukrainian counteroffensive near Kherson, Musk ordered Starlink coverage in a specific area reduced. Ukrainian drone units lost connectivity. Artillery coordination failed. The encirclement operation collapsed. Musk's stated reason, according to his own biographer, was concern about catastrophic escalation if the advance succeeded. There was also the small matter of SpaceX paying for a war out of its own pocket. The exact weight of each concern, only Musk knows. But the question that landed in Washington wasn't about Musk's reasoning. It was simpler than that. How did a private CEO make a battlefield decision that affected the outcome of a land war in Europe? And nobody in the U.S. government could override him. Can we order him to turn it back on? He's not in our chain of command, sir. Can we ask? We did. He said, no. By that point, SpaceX was already carrying 95% of all U.S. government launches. That included the drones, the classified satellites, and the frontline communications of the most active land war in Europe since 1945. When Starlink went down, Starshield, the military-grade version, went with it. Ukrainian units reported going dark. 24 autonomous Navy vessels drifted uncontrolled off the coast of California. Democratic legislators wrote letters. Defense analysts gave interviews. We cannot be dependent on one company for this. The benefits outweigh the risks. Nobody said, we have an alternative. Because they don't. Going public, going nowhere. Months later, the IPO priced worth more than Apple had been for most of Apple's life as a public company. Going public changed exactly one thing. SpaceX got access to the capital markets. Nothing else changed. No board it couldn't override. Every decision still made the way one person wanted. That money goes into Starship, the biggest rocket ever built, large enough to carry more cargo to orbit in a single flight than the entire space shuttle program managed in a year. And now SpaceX has the capital to build it without asking anyone's permission. The aerospace companies that laughed at the warehouse in El Segundo are now competing for the contracts SpaceX doesn't want. The governments that used to own the space program now buy seats on someone else's rockets. There's a word that gets used a lot in government circles to describe what TSMC is to semiconductors, what Saudi Arabia used to be to oil. Single point of failure. The thing your entire system runs through. The thing you can't lose without losing everything else. For a century, governments controlled space. They built the rockets, decided who launched and when, and kept the whole thing inside a chain of command they could pull. That era ended in a warehouse in El Segundo. Nobody's quite figured out what to do when the single point of failure goes public.